Hello, this is Brad Kane, CEO and co-founder at Salus. I'm really pleased to have a fairly new colleague of mine, Claire Roberts, join us today. Claire and I met online because I was very impressed with her posts around AI, child protection, child safety issues, and I wanted to have her join us here on Voices of Experience to give her views on these topics. Claire, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Brad, and thanks for having me on the podcast. A bit of background. I have not been in child protection for years and years. I've been in technology for years and years. So I spent sort of 25 years working in sort of big tech change, helping companies make change make sense. So bringing about big technology, making it profitable, making sure it works for people. And I spent the last 8 years writing a change strategy and bringing about big technology change for a big engineering company, so Arm. So we were working sort of really at the coalface of AI and seeing AI developing in the industry, which was very exciting. We got to work quite early doors with companies like OpenAI and Meta. And I think what I started to see quite openly was that as exciting as AI was, and with all of the wonderful opportunities that it was bringing, it was also very, very early in its inception. It felt to me, and it still feels to me sometimes, like it's in its test phase, and yet we're all using it, and we're looking at it as if it's a finished and beautifully packaged product. And what I also started to see was that as we invested, not just my company, but in the industry, as we invested more and more in AI, we seem to be investing less and less in people. And I started to see across the industry this natural trade-off between investment in AI and investment in diversity and inclusion, something I feel very strongly about. Especially as a woman, having worked in an engineering company, having worked in lots of very high barrier to entry industries for women, I felt quite passionate that actually we haven't done anywhere near enough to say that diversity and inclusion is in a good place, and yet suddenly we seem to be going backwards in this sphere. And so I felt that actually, with my experience, maybe it was time to go on the other side. And rather than working for a big company trying to develop, really big tech for the really big players, maybe I needed to be on the side of helping companies work out how to adopt it in a way that was meaningful to their people and how to keep it safe. So that opened up a whole new world for me of thinking about AI from a different perspective. And one of the things that I kept reading about and learning more about was its impact on sort of online communities and, through social media, its impact on children that are using social media. And I found a company, a very new company, that had been started by a wonderful CEO and founder called Tara Steele, called the Safe AI for Children Alliance. And I was completely outraged by their campaign, because they had this campaign that had these 3, what we call non-negotiables. And I've read these non-negotiables and I was honestly kind of outraged that we even had to say these things. And I felt like the fact that we had to say these things was such an indictment of the world that we live in and the pace of change and the dangers, that I felt like I needed to get involved with this company and help make sure that everybody had these statements. And the 3 non-negotiables that Tara articulated were so simple but so powerful. They were that AI should never produce sexualized images of children. It should never encourage emotional dependency, and it should never encourage children to harm themselves or to harm other people. And when you say those statements, it can sound very like, well, of course, let's move on and fix something more important. But it's like, no, those statements are huge, absolutely huge, because they are not givens. They're not givens in society. They're not a given in this industry. And actually, the fact that we can't say with any sense of security or confidence that AI won't do these things is a huge problem. And so I got involved with Safeca, and I'm now their Director of Strategy. And we started to really look at and think about, well, how do we get people to commit to these non-negotiables? How do we work out why people can't just say, yes, of course, these things should never happen. Of course, AI should never produce sexualized images of children. It's almost crazy that we have to say that out loud. Of course, it should never encourage emotional dependency. Why on earth would we want to live in a world where our children are fundamentally able to be manipulated and controlled by something other than a human? It's bad enough that they can be manipulated and controlled by lots of bad humans out there, but we're talking about them being manipulated and harmed by a machine, and by the people that sit behind that machine that can't even be seen. That feels incredibly dangerous. And of course, we don't want to live in a world where they're encouraged to harm themselves. So it just felt like such an obvious campaign to get behind.
Given that we live in an era where I think we have not fully understood the lessons of the effect that social media has had on children, I've heard the term, and I think this is very astute. Social media has been a 500 million child experiment, and we're still seeing what some of the effects of that experiment can be with children. Given that, and given what you've raised in terms of even these most basic safeguards, what is it that really concerns you the most right now about how this technology is being used and how we're either protecting or not protecting children?
So I think the biggest concern with social media, so I think we've done a lot of talking over the last few years about screen time. I think everybody's been, everybody's on the bandwagon of thinking that, okay, it's not great for our children to be attached to screens all the time. That just feels obvious. Mental well-being and the health of your brain and the health of your child as a physical thing. It feels obvious that screen time is not a bad thing. But actually, now that we're in this world of having seen a generation through the social media transformation, and now we're seeing some of the outcomes of that, which I think is really interesting. I think we have to look at what's really a problem in social media and also recognize the bits that aren't a problem in social media, because you've got two different camps of people. When you ask children and young people and young adults whether they want social media, you get two very, very different responses, and depending on what study you read, you can convince yourself of either of these being true. So the World Happiness Report produced a fascinating study about 6 months ago, and when they asked young people whether they wanted to be on social media, they very clearly said, no, we don't want to be on social media, but we can't opt out of it. And therein lies a massive problem, is that to opt out of social media feels like you're opting out of social connection. It feels like you're opting out of being part of the social community at school. That's not something that we can expect our children to want to do. No teenager wants to opt out of being included. We can't expect children to want to opt out of being included. But when you ask them, but do you want it to exist? They say no. They would love not to have to opt out. They would love for it to not be there at all. But then you get another perspective, and I sat in the House of Lords recently in the UK Parliament, talking to a really wide range of people involved in social media, because we were looking at whether or not we should be banning under 16s from being able to access social media. And you had a lot of these young people saying, no, don't ban us from it, because the world of connection that it enables for us is enormous. It is, if you are a child that's suffering from being isolated, if you don't have a natural community of people like you, that think like you, that look like you, if you don't have that community around you, which exists for many of our children, social media can be a place to find your people. It can be a place to find your voice. And I think when we look at the real positives of what social media and online connection brings us, we see huge advances in this idea of connection. The problem is the design of the tools. So the problem is not children on their screens. The problem is not social media in its ability to connect in some respects. The problem is the design and what these tools are designed to do, because what might have originally been designed as a platform to enable community has morphed into something a lot more dangerous. It's morphed into a design of algorithmic sort of dependency. It is optimizing to keep, it's optimizing for passive engagement. I think this is a really important thing. When you look at the World Happiness Report of children's happiness and their time on social media, you don't necessarily get more time on social media equals more unhappy. What you get is more time on social media with passive content making you very unhappy. More time on social media with active content actually has no impact on children at all. So by active content, what I mean is children that are, and young people that are using social media to connect. They're choosing who to speak to, choosing what to speak about, choosing what to see. That's active use of social media. Passive use of social media is where you are fed, is where you go onto social media and you are fed so much content, scrolling. You're not choosing to see any of that. The algorithm is feeding you the things that it thinks is going to make you click. And unfortunately, what we click on is not the stuff we're interested in. It's the stuff that shocks us. It's the stuff that makes us
And I
get,
think
oh my God.
that one of the problems that we'll look back and see, both for adults and maybe worse for children, right, with like many things, is the inherent sycophancy that seems to be built into a lot of the interaction, which drives the stickiness and engagement, part of it, but it also can really help metastasize, all the things that are negative about that kind of interaction.
Of course.
There's a lot happening at the legislative level in the EU and in various states here in the United States. Anything that you're looking towards that you think is a very positive step to putting some guardrails in place?
I think the main thing is, we talk a lot about safety by design, and I know that the Online Safety Act is really looking hard at what safety by design really means. We look at companies like Snapchat, who talk about having safety by design as one of their founding principles. You have to look at the fundamental design of that platform and recognize that it's fundamentally designed for private, evasive communications. So how can there be any safety by design in a platform that's fundamentally designed for evasive private communications? You can't track anything that's written on Snapchat. And I think one of the things that I think the Online Safety Act is really doing is starting to really address, and of course these things are awfully slow. The technology is moving at such pace and the governance is moving so slowly, because that's just how fast governance moves. But one of the things they're really trying to address is what does safety by design actually mean? Because safety by design can't be something that looks at a potential use of AI or potential use of social media and says, well, that's outweighed by all the good stuff, because it's just not. We look at something like Snapchat and we know that because of its fundamental design to be private communications, secret communications, communications that can never be tracked, can never be seen, of course, that is now the number one breeding ground for sexual predators of children and for drug pushers. Because why would it not be? So they're not a small part of the problem. They're not a trade-off of this brilliant stuff that you're getting. They are the main users of the platform. And I think we have to start looking at what safety by design means and saying safety by design means thinking about the worst possible unintended use of your platform, unintended use of the design, and planning for that. Planning for that first, not planning for that last.
I think that industry has shown that they are the wrong guardians on these issues. There was a leaked memo or leaked research being done within Meta, and what they thought was acceptable interaction between
completely.
chat
Yes, I saw that.
and a youth was just completely
Totally
shocking.
Yeah, and the volumes, we've seen so many of these people talking out that are working within these companies that are saying, actually, companies like Meta have known for years that the algorithmic design was having a negative impact on children. They have the complaints. They can see exactly what's going on, and they choose not to do anything about it. And I think when I look at some of the positives that I'm seeing come out, one of the positives I'm seeing coming out is just more awareness of this. Meta on trial in a court being told, actually, we don't care that your platform is just there to serve content. We can prove that you are choosing to serve content to certain people. And that means that you have to take accountability for that. And that's a huge change, because what these companies used to say was that it was open communications. They are a platform providing an opportunity for two people to communicate. How those two people communicate and what they communicate, within a certain set of guidelines is not their problem. Whereas what we're seeing from the courts now is rulings that say, no, it very much is your problem. Because, and I think that the brilliant one that came out against Meta recently was the court case in New Mexico, because they set up a fake account of I think it was about a 13-year-old, 12-year-old girl, and she posted very little on this fake account, and within, I think, about 24 hours, she had 7,000 male followers, 7,000 men choosing to follow her. And you're like, well, why would these men have ever known that this account existed? Because this picture of this young girl was shown to them, because they had shown a preference for looking at pictures and looking and engaging with the accounts of young children. Now, rather than seeing that happen and knowing it happened and saying this is clearly predatory behavior, instead it becomes a pattern, and a pattern that's used to serve content. So men that are going on and looking at the accounts of 13-year-old girls are now being shown the account. They're being fed the next victim. 7,000 men followed her. So you'd think, okay, Meta can see 13-year-old girl, 7,000 men have chosen to follow her. What should we do? They showed her a way to make her account a professional account so that she could monetize it. So they actively said, you're getting lots of great attention from men here. Why don't you have a professional account, and we'll support you to monetize the attention that you're getting. That, for me, is a clear indictment, and of course the courts agreed, a clear indictment that this is not a platform that's allowing two people to share content with any sense of consent. It's a platform that is serving content.
Since the beginning of the internet, they've relied on this analogy that they're more like the phone company than anything else, and
Exactly
hence
that.
not liable for the communication that happens over their network. But that's clearly not true, and I think that at least that there's a level of understanding, even in legislative bodies, that content is being served with intent to
Absolutely.
individuals.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's scope for technology to actually be part of the solution here?
Yes, of course, always. I think, I wrote a paper a while ago. It's never seen the light of day, Brad. I might send it to you to read. I wrote a paper in a frenzy of outrage and frustration about trying to answer this question of whether technology can help us. Of course, technology can help us. And I'll tell you what the title of the paper was. It was titled, Lazy, Selfish and Stupid. The greatest risk AI poses is not what it can do, it's who controls it. And it was really a paper that was saying, of course technology can do great things, and of course technology can do bad things. The capability of the technology, to talk about AI is like talking about science. It's such a broad and huge field. It is like saying, is science good? Could science be used for good? Of course science can be used for good, and of course science can be used for bad. Science gives us the atomic bomb, and it also gives us the X-ray machine, that can see your cancer, and it gives us the medicine to fix that cancer. And I think AI is exactly that. It is such a broad field. AI is not social media. AI is not ChatGPT. It's not the app that you've got on your phone that helps you, make your hair look longer or make your legs look longer. AI is a fundamental way of helping a machine to learn from data and then make a prediction to do something. That's all it's doing constantly. It's learning from data, finding patterns in data and using those patterns to help it make predictions, whether that's making a prediction on a word, making a prediction on how to build a picture. That's all it's fundamentally doing. So of course, it could be used to end workplace inequality. The data that it can give us about inequalities in our decision making could be phenomenal. Or if we allow it to, then it will just reinforce and repeat all of those workplace inequalities and scale them. Actually, it's just like a mirror. If it's just learnt on all of our past mistakes, it will just perpetuate them. Or because it's learnt from them and because it's now data rich, it can show us those past mistakes. It can put the data in front of us that says actually inequality and bias and child safety and all these things, they're not things that we can't put data to now. We can show you where they are, which means we could do something different. So I think there's huge scope for how we use AI positively, but that has to come with a recognition of money talks. And these huge AI companies have got to make their money somehow. And so, of course, the prioritized features are going to be the ones that help them make money.
I worry that they don't have the incentive to use technology to put the safeguards in place. And so I think going back to your comments about Meta and the recent court cases, it almost seems like we can't legislatively get in front of technology in the way that in an ideal world we might be able to because of the speed at which innovation is happening. But if you change the liability, then there would be an incentive by the social media companies and the AI companies to actually put some resources towards putting in place the guardrails. So that to me is the fulcrum, right? Is the pressure point. Like if you take away their ability to, not be liable and to be liable at a reasonable level in terms of what they can do, then that will shift a lot of their resources towards protection and prevention and away from just engagement.
Of course, take their customers away from them. Simple as that. Take the audience away from them. And it's a funny thing because, and I use the same phrase a lot, that we can't hold these big companies to account. And I always come back to this question of, well, why not? Why is it? How have we got to a place where so few, and it is only a few companies, we're talking about maybe 5 to 10 massive technology companies. How is it that they can't be stopped? How is it that it's not that we can't govern them, it's not that we can't impose sanctions, it's not that we can't tell them not to do, it's that we choose not to. Or rather, our governments choose not to. The US government chooses not to because of the power and the opportunity that comes from those companies and with those companies. So it's a conscious choice that's being made here. There's nothing actually physically stopping anybody from saying, Meta, you can't do this. It's a case of people are not prepared.
It took us for 50 or 60 years to learn how to protect people from unsafe cars, right? That industry had to mature into the 70s before we took sort of measurable actions to reduce traffic deaths.
Yeah.
People could listen to our conversation here and be frozen with fear and concern. But what should parents do right now? What's the top things that parents with young or young adult children can do right now?
I think that's a great question, and I'm going to answer it from a very personal perspective because I am the mum of 4. And which is rather useful for all of the research I do actually, but I cover every age spectrum. So I have a 7-year-old daughter who is probably more technically adept than anybody else in my household. If I let her access to my phone, she is going to fill a Shein shopping trolley very, very quickly and try and buy things. She's very adept at using my phone. So I've got a 7-year-old daughter. I have a 10-year-old son at primary school who is allowed to game online with some very restrictions in place, of course, but doesn't really understand the world of AI. He's just starting to learn a little bit about it at school. A 16-year-old son, who of course is going to school with lots of people who are using lots of different tools, lots of online gaming. He himself is not allowed to use any type of social media, and luckily for us has never asked to, so we haven't had to exclude him from that. Doesn't seem to have been a problem for him. And also a 22-year-old who very much grew up in the world of Snapchat at a time when I didn't know what Snapchat really was. And so it's been quite interesting having children at the 4 different ages. And I think it really honestly is as simple as this for parents. We have to start thinking about and really acknowledging who is influencing our children and how they're influencing them. And I think we need to, the only way to do that is to have really honest conversations. And the truth is, when you're talking to a teenager, that conversation can't be, you mustn't use this app, you mustn't do this, you mustn't do that, and if you do it, I'm just going to take away your phone. That just doesn't work. All that does is push kids into secretive, evasive behaviour. What we've got to do is we've got to be smart. We've got to tell stories. We've got to say, and we use this with our kids all the time, we've got to say, we heard about this poor 13-year-old boy who was using an app, didn't really realise what he was doing, started talking to somebody, shared a photograph of himself. That person turned that photograph into something very embarrassing and threatened to show all of his friends. That poor little boy didn't feel brave enough to tell his mum because he thought he was going to get in trouble. Instead, he started to pay that man money. Eventually, that man asked him for so much money that he took his own life. These are true stories, by the way. These are very, very real stories that are happening right now. Sextortion is one of the biggest problems, and it's a huge problem for boys, actually. But we have to start telling, and maybe, you have to choose what level of drama and violence you include in these stories, but we've got to start telling our kids stories that say, that didn't need to happen. You're not saying, don't do this, and if you do it, but what you're saying is, isn't it sad that that child wasn't able to just tell his mum, I made a mistake. I used an app that I don't think I should have been using, and somebody is now doing something really embarrassing about me, mum, and, I'm really scared. That's what our kids have got to be able to say to us. And I think we have to, as parents, acknowledge that there has to be red lines. There's got to be apps that we don't let our kids use. If we think we're keeping our kids safe because they're upstairs in their bedroom rather than playing at the local park, well, let me tell you, you've just put them into an online park that's got 25,000 men sat around the edge watching. That's the park you've sent them off to play in.
I think it really demands a greater level of engagement by parents. And I think that if I think about my lifetime, some of the risks I ran as a kid was really just getting a bloody lip. But now it's so much more, right, for kids. And I think that just demands that parents are engaged and proactive and talk to their kids more. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? So I agree. I think that there's things that we can do, as parents and as members of the broader community where even if our kids are now older, we've got friends with young kids. And I think that we can all help to make it a safer place to make those mistakes and to recover from them, because that's part of what growing up is all about. And I think we just need to be there in a way for our kids that the heightened risks of technology demand. So I think that's a great point. Any final thoughts you have in terms of what we should be doing as individuals, as professionals that care about this issue, that want to advocate for greater child protection online?
I think the best, honestly and truthfully, I think people can sometimes get caught up in their own world of professional people. So you and I can have great conversations about child safety, and I can write a great LinkedIn post and it will reach all of the people in my community that care about child safety. In truth, if you want to make a real difference, chat to the people down at the pub or the supermarket, chat to your friends who aren't on LinkedIn, that have never even considered child safety. Don't be that person that kind of wags the finger and says your kids shouldn't be on social media. Don't be that person, but be brave enough to have conversations with the people around you in your community, in your social network, the people around you who you know probably are on social media, who you know whose kids are probably using these apps, who have just got absolutely no awareness. Just share a little bit of knowledge, share a story, share a, oh my God, I heard about this, did you hear about this? You don't have to be the naysayer, but we need to share some of these stories. When I've got a sister-in-law with 3 teenage daughters, and it terrifies me every time I see them posting pictures of their very, very beautiful selves on social media. I'm desperate to say, my God, please get these children off social media. But instead, every time I see them, I'm just telling them stories. I'm not trying to be too scaremongering, but I'm just telling them stories to make them just think twice. Maybe don't post quite so many pictures. Maybe we don't need that picture of you in a bikini, really. And
I think that's a great point, that we can be part of the solution, and ultimately technology can be intimidating, but I think we have to be empowered about pushing back its boundaries and what it can do for ill. So, Claire, I really appreciate your time and thoughts and attention on this topic. And I enjoyed talking to you today, and hope we're going to continue this conversation, outside of this context, and keep working together on it.
Thank you so much, Brad.
Thank you.